Because its bombs were stored vertically, the heaviest weapon it could carry in its bomb bay was only 551 pounds. The Dornier 17, known from its shape as the flying pencil, had already ceased production by the start of the Battle of Britain. The aircraft was limited in bomb load, speed and range. It also had no armour protection. In spite of all this, the Dornier remained popular with aircrew. It was the most reliable of all German bombers and was highly manoeuvrable. The aircraft was also structurally very strong and could bomb in a shallow dive at over 370 miles per hour. Because of their vulnerability, Dornier units favoured low-altitude, terrain-following tactics to gain the advantage of surprise. The Junkers 88 had been designed at astonishing speed, and the Battle of Britain would see its first operational use on a large scale. The aircraft was admitted by the RAF to be the best warplane of its type anywhere, and it would remain Germany's most effective bomber. The Junkers 88 was fast, versatile, rugged, and highly manoeuvrable. It was poorly armoured and armed, but its dive brakes would often allow it to escape, even from a Spitfire. Amongst the airmen of the Luftwaffe, morale was at an all-time high. Victory in Poland and the West had left them with the belief that the German Air Force was invincible. They had suffered heavy losses since the start of the war, but the force had an enormous number of combat-tested veterans, and the men knew that their training and tactics were superb. Fighter pilots learned to attack not only bombers, but other fighter formations, wing against wing, squadron against squadron, down to individual combat. Bomber crews were often trained together as a unit, and the captain of the aircraft, normally the observer, was taught to do the job of every other crew member, including flying the aeroplane. Pilots had up to 250 hours flying experience, including more night sorties than the pilots of any other air force. The Luftwaffe had been training 800 new pilots a month, since long before the war began. Like their RAF counterparts, German ground crew would be under enormous pressure throughout the battle. The whole Luftwaffe offensive would depend on them turning around bombers and fighters as fast as possible and keeping them in serviceable condition. The job would be made infinitely more difficult by the quickly improvised nature of many German airfields. Servicing work, including engine changes, often had to be done in the open, with the absolute minimum of facilities. Like their aircrew comrades, the morale of the men on the ground was high, but after 2 months of operations, and still labouring to establish 100 new air bases, they were badly in need of rest. On the production front, although few airmen knew it, the Luftwaffe had already lost its edge over Britain. In June, Germany had built fewer than 900 aircraft, including only 140 single-engined fighters, less than 1/3 of British fighter production. The Battle of Britain would begin in earnest on July the 10th, 1940, with Luftwaffe attacks on British Channel convoys. But even before the first phase of the conflict, the British people were to be shown that the Luftwaffe was within striking distance. Every day, the number of intrusions by German reconnaissance aircraft over England increased. The air defences were probed, and the response time of the RAF was measured. The next step was a series of night attacks on British factories, ports, and airfields. The first large-scale air raid on Britain was on the night of June the 18th. 100 bombers attacked targets in southern, eastern and northern England and South Wales. Before the end of the month, there were 8 more nights of bombing, the raiders ranging widely over the north, the Midlands and southern England, causing many civilian casualties. On July the 1st, German bombers mounted the first major daylight raid on Britain. The targets were Wick in Scotland and Hull in Yorkshire. From now on, the raiders would come by day and by night, and on both sides, losses would begin to mount. The deadly contest of grinding attrition that would become known as the Battle of Britain was about to enter its first phase. While the Luftwaffe completed its deployment for an all-out offensive against the RAF and waited for the final go-ahead from Adolf Hitler, British Channel convoys offered easy targets. RAF Fighter Command was to be presented with a terrible dilemma: commit fighters to protect the convoys or lose the ships. When plans had been drawn up for Britain's air defence, the RAF had never been asked to include fighter cover for convoys. The cargoes could have been transported by rail, but the Admiralty was insisting that the merchantmen continue to sail for reasons of national prestige. Air Chief Marshall Sir Hugh Dowding was forced to agree to defend the ships, but he was determined to do so with the smallest possible number of fighters. Because of poor weather over the Channel, the German campaign got off to a slow start. It was July the 4th before the Luftwaffe launched its first large-scale convoy attack. The same day, the first fighter sweep in strength was flown over Kent. On the 7th and 8th, the tempo sharply increased. Channel ports were bombed, and more convoys were hit, leaving several ships sunk or damaged. It was Dowding's strategy to refuse to respond to German fighter sweeps, and where possible, these were ignored. But attacks on ships and ports had to be countered, often by units of only 6 or 7 aircraft.